and it hits me, oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
You know, there's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham Forest incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer really standing in the clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes and he said, "We're not alone."
Welcome to Podcast UFO for our live show. During the show, feel free to participate live in our chat room. And don't forget to like us on our very active Facebook page.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host, and I'm really excited about my guest tonight. A lot of people are too. I've got some email. It's actually going to be Alejandro. He's going to be my guest, and we're changing things up a little bit. Jordan Bonaparte from the Nighttime Podcast up in Canada. Beautiful podcast. We'll talk a little bit about that. But he's filling in for the news. So I'm treating Alejandro like he's any other guest on the show. He's going to have his own spot as a guest and news with Jordan. I want to thank everyone for supporting the show. We are live. You can watch the full shows live always on YouTube. You can also listen to them live on KGRA Radio. And we are also playing over at the Dark Matter Digital Network every Thursday night over there. That's for the full show. And like I said, I want to thank everyone that supports the show. We absolutely could not do it without you. And we do appreciate every listener, but the support really helps us carry on. And I think that's enough for me, and I shall welcome our guest, Jordan. Welcome to the show.
Guest of honor. Big shoes to fill, but I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. Hey, first of all, thank you for filling in, kind of short notice. And,
yes, no problem.
Also, like I said, I want to say about your show, your podcast. I started listening to it recently. I listened to it a little bit here and there, but the quality of that show is just, I don't know how much time you spend in the editing room, but it's just a beautiful show. And
Thank you.
You do a really nice job. It's very interesting, and it's not just UFOs, it's other really fascinating topics as well. So anyway, welcome. And do you want to, you sent me an email, I think, or let's see, I think maybe I saw it on Facebook. You're going to be on a radio show as well?
Well, what it is my podcast got picked up by a company called Chorus, which is a major Canadian television and radio conglomerate, I guess. They own a lot of major TV stations and radio stations. They picked up my podcast to air. It's syndicated nationally now, so it's aired on radio across Canada on Sunday nights and Saturday nights in most major cities. And it's kind of I don't know if it's anything any similar arrangement has happened with many other podcasts, but they're using my podcast kind of in collaboration with some of the TV shows that they air. So, for example, Chorus, who's taken over my podcast, they own the History Channel, which is a big Canadian station. I don't know if he's have it in the States, but they have, like, they're doing the Project Blue Book as that TV show, and they do, they do Curse of Oak Island, which is a major show here. Yep. So they're kind of looking at ways to work on things basically with my show and those shows co-promoting through the podcast and television. So it's going to be cool. I don't really know what's going to happen with it yet, but it's been going on for about a month or two, and I don't know. It's going to be interesting.
Great. So did you get any news together for us?
I have a few things. And I tried to kind of stick with Canadian news, but
that's
sadly
fine.
Not a lot happens in ufology in Canada, it seems. The biggest thing recently was an article, and I found this interesting because although the UFO event wasn't that spectacular, the news article was mainly about the witnesses' trouble reporting it and getting someone to take them seriously. It happened in a small town called Sturgeon. It's in Prince Edward Island, which is one of the smallest provinces in Canada. I'll just read you a brief excerpt from the news article. Basically, it says the witness, his name is Bruce, he knows the skies in his area. He's seen a lot of satellites in the sky near his home, but this particular object was not like any he'd seen before. Initially, his thought was that it was a plane that he was looking at in the night sky, as the object had flashing lights, but when it stopped dead in the sky and then shot in a 90-degree angle towards his home and stopped again, he knew it was something special. he watched it in the sky kind of moving around sporadically like that for, I think it was about 4 or 5 minutes until ultimately it shot off basically into the night sky in the direction of Nova Scotia, where I am coincidentally. So he thought it was strange and something special. The next day, he had asked a few people basically at the coffee shop, "Did you see the weird thing in the sky last night?" And sure enough, a few people in his town did. He then, knowing it was something unique and special and that he wasn't the only one who saw it, he decided to report it. And that's kind of where the news article really got interesting. He talked about contacting initially the Royal Canadian Air Force. They didn't take him seriously. Next called Air Canada, which is a major airline. They hung up on him. He called Nav Canada, also hung up on him. Called the RCMP, and they told him it wasn't something that they deal with. So basically he was left with no, I guess, mainstream avenue to report it. In the article, he then went on to describe getting hooked up with Chris Rutkowski, who's probably been on both of your shows before. Mm-hmm. He runs Ufology Research, which is a major Canadian civilian UFO investigation organization. Ended up, this witness found a safe place with Chris and his crew, and they took his information, and I believe they're investigating. But really what I found interesting about that article was it just shows how much trouble, like so many of us see these things, but if you want to report it to someone other than basically a fringe group like MUFON or whatnot, you really don't have very many avenues.
Yeah, some people wouldn't call them a fringe group, but I understand what you mean. You know, fringe in the normal world, I would say definitely as far as that goes. But yeah, I mean, when I had my sighting in 2006, I had no idea how to report. I never even looked online. That never even occurred to me. And I made phone calls, so I understand that. But people hanging up on him, that's pretty discouraging.
Yeah, and I don't mean fringe disrespectfully, but I'm just saying, like, if you talk about, like, let's say if you see my father, who is a steel worker from small town Nova Scotia, and he sees, it could be an alien spaceship that lands and they get out and attack him. He's never going to know what MUFON is or how to contact them. Yeah. He'll probably call the police in Air Canada.
Yeah, I call the police, right.
Yeah. Exactly, and they'd probably hang up on my dad. So I guess we're in the know, so we're fortunate to know about these different groups and have an avenue to go, but we're far from the average person in terms of the UFO phenomenon. The average person who sees something is not going to have a clue where to go. And I thought this article, what I liked about it was it kind of, in a mainstream news source, which is the province's largest paper, it kind of tells the story of what happens with an average person when they see something.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing because most people would get hung up on once, like I did basically, and that was as far as I went. I mean, I actually hung up on the dispatcher because they put me on hold for 20 minutes.
Ooh.
But I mean, I just was discouraged, and it's amazing this guy just kept going and trying different avenues.
Yeah, and eventually found somewhere. So yeah, good for him. But that was one. That's probably the most recent piece of Canadian news. But I think the big piece of news actually I think is coming out of the U.S. I don't want to pronounce it. But I'm going to try. It's the Oumuamua.
Oh, you're talking about you're talking about the asteroid that that's a Hawaiian name.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, Alejandro, I think, could nail that a lot better than I could. I call it the O period asteroid.
Yeah.
And I've even today when I woke up this morning, I had already had 2 or 3 people had messaged me on Twitter and stuff, sending me the article about the Harvard researchers who basically have a paper being published, I think, in about a week's time, where they're basically pleading a case that this could possibly be intelligently controlled, this particular asteroid. And I think they're basing that on they were watching or measuring its speed and velocity and distance as it passed by the sun, and it appeared to either change course or gain speed. And I guess the Harvard students' paper is just going to plead the case that it could potentially be of intelligent design.
Yeah, just because of the shape of it, 40 meters by, I think it's something like 40 meters by 400 meters, and sort of like a stick in a way. And I think they said it might be red, which is interesting as well. But also, yes, it's traveling at 60,000 miles an hour, and not the typical 40 that that these objects usually travel. and I may be off a little bit on speed, but it's something like that.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting, and it's cool to see some university students who are doing some real work, basically having an open enough mind to consider it.
That's right.
I'll be interested to read their paper.
Yeah, that's right. I think in a way, I think the changing events of December 16th last year with the New York Times article has kind of opened the door for letting people be a little more comfortable in making this type of speculation. And it is just a theory. It's just another theory.
Yeah, but it's still, even if it's just a theory and even if it proves to be false, it's still interesting to go down that road.
Yeah.
Especially in an academic paper with the scientific techniques. I find it cool. But it's I heard it described as cigar shape, which I like.
Yeah.
I always enjoy people talking about a cigar shaped UFO.
Yeah, and it has portholes. No, I didn't hear
Yeah.
that one. I'm starting the rumor. But anyway, hey, Jordan, thank you so much. And why don't you give out your website, how people can find you?
Yeah, my show's Nighttime Podcast. You can just find me on nighttimepodcast.com. And I investigate Canadian mysteries, true crime, and strange stories. And I've had Martin and Alejandro on an episode I did about a UFO sighting in Clarenville, Newfoundland.
Right. Yeah, that's
and I was
right.
happy to have you both.
Yeah.
Great. Well,
Excellent.
thanks for having me, Martin. I'm looking forward to listening to you and Alejandro talk.
All right. Hey, thanks a lot.
My pleasure. Anytime. Have a great night.
All right. You too. All right. All right, everyone. So our guest needs no introduction, mostly because he's on almost every single show I have. But anyway, he is a radio host, of course, for Open Minds Radio. He's an editor and a writer for Open Minds magazine, as well as Den of Geek. We'll talk a little bit about that because he's getting a lot of traction over there. He was a spokesperson for MUFON and a director of public education, on and on and on. He's doing a great show too on Thursday nights, a live show. We'll talk a little bit about that, but I'm going to be asking him hopefully some interesting questions. And tonight he's got this professional suite he's working on. I just have to do a little bit of adjusting on that. And Alejandro, welcome to the show.
Yeah, I'm just finishing something up, so if you can give me like
5 minutes,
15
no
minutes.
problem. Yeah, no problem.
Just kidding.
Yeah, hey,
I'll put that aside for now.
Yeah, thanks for being on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And this is, I had someone slated for tonight. I had Ray Stanford slated a few weeks ago, and then he goes, "Oh my God!" He goes, "It's election night, midterm election night." So yeah. So I asked you, and you were graceful enough, but of course I gave you over a week's notice. But you were graceful enough.
To be honest, and I don't know, I'm not even going to talk about sides, but I'm sure it'll still upset people because whenever you say the word anything about politics, but yeah, I'm kind of like my dad. My dad is a big Denver Broncos fan, but he has a hard time watching the games because he gets so worked up. And that's kind of how I feel about the elections.
Yeah.
I don't want to watch. I'm going to check in here and there because I don't want to get too worked up. Karen, of course, my lady friend is getting all worked up.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I totally understand that. I think I told you I lived in Colorado, lived in Boulder area, Longmont area. And I remember I had a friend that was so into the Broncos, he bought an orange pickup truck. He had everything orange. He was just crazy. He made sure he had a golden retriever because it was orange. But
oh, wow.
Yeah. I'm going to tell a quick little election joke.
Okay.
Yeah.
I
don't think I've ever told a joke on my show. So
really?
So I can't ever remember doing that. So anyway, this guy was out canvassing, a politician who was out canvassing, knocking door to door, trying to get some votes the other day. And he knocks on this door, and this kid answers. Well, the kid, the guy opens the door, and the kid answers, and he's like shocked and steps back because the kid's wearing his sister's bra on his head, lipstick smeared all over his face. He's drinking a martini. He's about 8 years old, drinking a martini and smoking a cigar. And the guy goes, oh my God. He goes, hey, are your parents home? And the kid says, what the frick do you think? You don't get it? Are your parents home? What the heck do you think?
So
of course they're not home.
Of course they're not home.
I thought it was a funny joke. I can't believe. Do I have any canned laughter anywhere? Yeah.
I think what's hilarious about that joke is that you find it funny. That to me makes it very funny.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that. Well, hey, Bill, our engineer of KGRA radio, at least he laughed. He sent me an L.
But I think he's laughing at us.
He's laughing
not
at us.
With us.
Yeah. Of all times,
by the way, can I mention a couple
silence.
things about what Jordan said?
Okay, sure. Yeah.
I agree with Jordan first that I think that it's important that, MUFON, I think, is fringe. And this topic is fringe. And I just always feel that it's important we remember that, because otherwise we make missteps and then we also forget to kind of thoroughly kind of explain the phenomena or what we find. Like literally, and it may be frustrating for some, we have to justify our interest in this phenomena all the time because it is fringe. But the advantage of doing that is that you're educating the people that you're talking to who do see it as fringe. And I think it's just important for me to always remember that, so I don't, because we get to be UFO weirdos when we forget that, and we're talking about all this UFO stuff like it's normal, and people are like, oh, and we got to remember, to make sure and we got to educate, and that's what it's all about, really, is when people kind of roll their eyes or like, oh my gosh, the UFO stuff. I think it's just education. For instance, my girlfriend's father, he was a colonel, retired a colonel in the Air Force. And oh my gosh, of course, he was not excited about what I do. And but over time, it's changed because he's learned a lot more. And at least now he recognizes that there is a credible aspect, and there's a community of people interested in the more substantial information. The other thing is I looked it up because it is a great story. But it's Oumuamua is how you say that.
Oh, Oumuamua. Thanks. Hey, someone in the chat room still waiting for my punchline.
Oh, I know. So was I. I can sympathize with that person.
I love that joke. But anyway, that's okay. Listen, one thing I don't think well, first of all, before I go on to that, I want to say I agree with you. And the one thing I don't, I agree with you sort of. Okay, but what is a little bit that I would say they're not fringe is that when someone wants to basically report something unidentified, that part of it, doesn't say that it's from, another planet or something like that. So I think there needs to be something out there where people can report something unidentified.
Oh,
so
for
in
sure.
that aspect.
Yeah. And that would go a long way to making it not fringe. And I think that we've been saying this for a long time, is that it's irresponsible of our government not to have an outlet like that. I mean, it's ridiculous. I talk about one of the first cases that I investigated when I was a field investigator was near my home. And it was this guy just recently back from Iraq, and he was a security, he was a young guy, and working security at a bank, kind of a campus, because they had several buildings. So he was walking in between buildings, and he saw this object in the air above one of the mountains. I can't remember. It's like I can't believe I forgot this. In Denver, it's like the big mountain with all the antennas on it, and a big landmark there in the city west of town. Lookout Mountain, I think it's called. So, and he thought it was really strange, and he watched it. And he was like very hypersensitive to recognizing things that are odd and reporting them, because he was just in a battle situation, a war zone. And he did his rounds, came back outside, and it was still there. And he noticed how close it was to commercial airlines, that they were on the same flight path there. So he called a lot of different places. He called the FAA, he called the airport, he called the news, and it was finally maybe the news, I think it was, that told him, hey, you should try this group called MUFON, which is surprising that, anybody would even think of that. So then he called MUFON and made his report. We were the only ones to take it seriously, but that's a great example. This is someone who's trained to look for something that could pose a threat in our airspace. And he sees something, near commercial airlines and immediately raises a red flag, and he thinks, I have to report this. And no one wanted to listen. And that is just ridiculous. I called the FAA on that case, and they said, oh, we don't do that. Call Bigelow or New Fork. And, of course, I'm like, well, I'm not reporting this. I'm trying to find out if you had any other reports. And they did check their records, said they didn't see anything. But it's just ridiculous that they wouldn't be concerned about, some object, parent aircraft in their airspace.
That's that's precisely what I said too, though, when I called the police department in Carmel, or was it Monterey, one of those places. Was I asked, has anybody else reported this? Has anybody else seen this? Because that's I was kind of curious if anyone had. And also, I think I told you about, I had an amazing fireball sighting. It was just unbelievable.
From the hot tub.
Yep. Good memory. Both of them were in a hot tub, actually. But anyway, I called, Pease Air Force Base back then, which is over, near the Betty and Barney Hill, or, all that in that area. Anyway, they said, they don't take any type of reports like that. And I didn't know who to call. I just didn't know who to call. So.
Yeah. And I think that's the issue. And I think that, there's a lot made. In fact, there was even a recent article and I can't remember who wrote it, and it was about ATIP again, this government UFO program. And they were like, why was the government investigating UFOs even though sightings are going down? And actually, it was a great article because it was talking about, well, there's other reasons that they would look into it. And so it was very positive, and this was a mainstream publication. But in my opinion, having looked at these numbers over the years, it's not necessarily a factor of sightings going down. It's a factor of MUFON and the other organization that receives sightings quite a bit, New Fork, people not knowing they're there. There was a spike in about the 2015-16 period because of the television Hangar 1, which was about MUFON. And I noticed this in there. I know because that's about, there was also a spike in membership for MUFON, but that has decreased as well, along with the sighting reports, as Hangar 1 has been off the air and people forget that they even exist. So it's more a case of awareness than necessarily, the amount of potential UFOs decreasing. At least we cannot definitively say there is a decrease in potential UFOs, in my opinion.
Since the article we were talking, during the news segment there about the Pentagon, New York Times article, do you have any idea if anything has gone up since then as far as reporting? So has that made any type of difference?
You know what? That is a really good question. But looking at the numbers, and I think Cheryl Costa would be a great person to ask. She writes for the Syracuse New Times and has written a book about sighting reports. But, as the end of the year comes to a close, I'll be doing another article where what I'll do is I grab at least the high-end stats to take a look at the monthly numbers and where they are and that sort of thing. At least casually looking at the numbers, I don't see a big change. Also, from reading Cheryl's articles every week, and I haven't seen her mention or change or seen it when she shows graphs and numbers. So I don't think there has been a change. And that would make sense in that the article did not mention MUFON or New Fork. So it didn't say, people, if you want to report, here's where to report. What would be interesting, though, is whether or not the New York Times got an increase in sighting reports. I would imagine they would have and or if the Pentagon or the DoD, if or Air Force received more reports. If they did, they would probably just turn people away, unfortunately. But we do have an example, the Chicago Tribune, when they wrote about the O'Hare Airport situation in 2008, where a disc-shaped object was seen over one of the concourses there at Chicago O'Hare Airport, and it was seen by United personnel, pilots and other people, and the witnesses reported this thing shot straight up through the sky and poked a hole in the clouds even that stayed for a little while before the hole closed. Well, the Chicago Tribune wrote about this, and the author of that article was all over the place. And there's even this local Chicago news report that he did where the video somehow got released before they went on the air and during while they were on the air. But they're kind of cross chat before they go on the air. And they're talking about just how big the story was. It was the biggest story that he had, that the paper had ever had, and they were getting flooded with reports. He said that there are a lot of dubious reports from people say they're talking to aliens, and I think the term he said is those went into my circular file, but a lot of them were really credible. And, some of those other reports could have been credible as well but I could see, because it's fringe, he doesn't want to look at that, but they were inundated with UFO reports, supposedly. So it's a good point that could have happened.
Yeah, I'm going to continue this conversation. We're at the break right now, so I will get back to that as soon as we come back, because I have a question in regards to that. So this is Martin Willis. We are live on KGRA Radio, and my guest is Alejandro Rojas, and we're going to be taking a break. Stay with us.
Clear. 3 minutes, gentlemen.
3 minutes. Okay. Thank you. All right.
So this part's still on YouTube. So we talk about other stuff?
Yeah. So, yes.
Can we say like bad words and stuff?
I haven't figured that out. I don't know what type of rating I have.
I'm not really much of a cusser anyway.
Well, I was going to ask you to tell a joke because I'm going to put you in the hot seat.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, tell a joke. Yeah. I'm so terrible. Okay, I've got a joke that's kind of long.
Well, we got 3 minutes, man. So.
Okay, I think I could get it. This is the only joke I ever remember, Captain Bravo. I don't know if you've heard this one. No. So there's this Captain Bravo, and this is during pirate times, way back, 1400s, 1500s, and he's the captain of this ship, we'll say an English ship or something, and they're sailing, the R type of thing. And they see pirates. So down from the crow's nest, you hear, Captain Bravo, there's a pirate ship on the horizon. Captain Bravo says, bring me my red shirt. So they bring him a red shirt. They take on these pirates, and they take him, and everybody's like, yay, yay, Captain Bravo. Well, a few days pass, and down from the crow's nest comes, Captain Bravo, 3 pirate ships on the horizon. Captain Bravo says, first mate, grab me my red shirt. And they take on the pirates, and they actually win. And everybody's like, oh, yay, Captain Bravo, you're amazing. And they tell him, why do you call for a red shirt every time before we go into battle? And he says, well, when I get hurt and I'm bleeding, you don't notice because of the red shirt, and you think I'm invincible, and that makes you fight even harder. And they're like, whoa, Captain Bravo's so smart. So they're like, yay, Captain Bravo. So a few days pass, and down from the crow's nest, they yell, Captain Bravo, 5 pirate ships on the horizon. So Captain Bravo yells, first mate, grab me my brown pants.
Okay. All right. I'm trying not to laugh. I was trying not to laugh, but I get it.
Yeah, you couldn't do it.
Yeah.
I did.
Yep, Bill, we even got laugh from the peanut gallery.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, it's my delivery. It must be my delivery in jokes. That's
well, yeah. I don't know how that one could be delivered. I could see that one being in a cartoon.
Yeah, well, it's like
being kind of
picturing
cute.
Things in your head, that type of thing.
It was a cute picture.
Yeah, the next break we're going to be fielding questions from the chat room. So anyone that's in YouTube right now, I don't have a chance to go over to KGRA Radio, but anyone that's in YouTube can put a question in the chat room during our next break, And then, of course, we're going to take calls after that as well. Bill, we're up about 20 minutes?
About 20 seconds.
20 seconds. I meant, seconds, minutes. Wow. Okay.
That would have been a lot of jokes.
That would have been, yeah. Okay. Sounds good.
Stand by about 15.
Yep.
Can make funny faces.
All right, coming back in 3, 2, 1, go.
All right, welcome back. This is Martin Willis. My guest is Alejandro Rojas, and this is Podcast UFO. So, Alejandro, before the break, we were talking about O'Hare and the reporter getting all the reports. I did have a conversation via email with with the reporter involved at the New York Times. I can't remember her name. She was one of the three that wrote that
Leslie?
article. Not Leslie. Not.
Not Leslie. Okay.
No, the New York Times in-house reporter.
Right.
I believe
I can't remember her name, but I'm going to Google it.
She does some reporting on the Pentagon work. I believe that's what her gig is at the New York Times. I think it's Barbara something, but anyway, if I looked online,
it is Helene Cooper.
Boy, did I ever get that wrong? It doesn't sound like Barbara. Anyway, I have an email exchange with her, and I think I'm going to revisit and send her an email and ask her what has happened as far as reports. I bet people are reporting to her.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You know what I mean?
And you know what would be interesting too? An interview with her would be really interesting.
She would. I did try.
Because the other question was, I would love to know is what she thought of the phenomena prior to the article and what she thinks now, and also, what she feels about the information. So, for instance, what's interesting about the New York Times article is that you have the videos and you have references to documents that To the Stars has also referenced, and Luis Elizondo, who used to work for the program, also has referenced. However, so everybody assumed that To the Stars gave the New York Times all of this material, but that's not true. According to Leslie Kean, they actually had their own anonymous source from within the Department of Defense that they received a lot of that material from. So there was a lot of material that they vetted. So they saw a lot of stuff. In fact, they saw a lot more stuff. For instance, the New York Times did not release those documents. They still have them.
Yes.
So she saw more stuff than they even were able to release. So she saw a lot of very credible information.
That's true. And there was. I did contact her and asked her if I could possibly interview her, and she said, she referred me to Leslie, and so I already said no. I've talked to Leslie a number of times and would love to talk to you. But anyway. She was interviewed. They have the New York Times Daily podcast, and they did a whole segment on the UFO story, which was really, really good. It's a great podcast anyway, but that was just on that, and mostly with her and Lou Elizondo was in it. And it's up on my website actually. It's on podcastufo.com if anyone wants to check that out. It's up there as a podcast. Anyone can listen to it for free on there. So if the file is still good, that is. So Alejandro, one of the things I don't think a lot of people have heard basically the backstory of you, and that's what I wanted to. You and I always talk about UFOs and space and interesting things like that. But as far as you, what started you? You mentioned your girlfriend's father. So you had to take some turns. You were interested in journalism and all that. What made you decide to take the path that you did, and how early on did you have an interest in this type of topic?
I guess I've always had an interest. I like to say that, living in Colorado, which I consider the Southwest, if you visit Colorado, I don't know that they always consider themselves, not like Arizona here or New Mexico where, they really embrace the being part of the Southwest, but they are in parts of Colorado or Mexico. In fact, when I was in college, I was president of the Hispanic Association out there. And a lot of our sayings for those of us from the area was, we didn't cross the border crossed us, because our families go back very many generations to where this area where our families are from, New Mexico and those areas, we're Mexico. So in that area, I think it's really unique, especially, and when I was growing up in Denver, like all of the Mexican Americans had roots in the valley, San Luis Valley and New Mexico area. And what's unique about it is it's a melding of Native American and Mexican American, and so there's a lot of legends in the area. I always heard about the legends in San Luis Valley. My grandma had an interesting story about that, and of course Chris O'Brien is a researcher who wrote The Mysterious Valley about the San Luis Valley. And so hearing these stories and kind of both of those cultures, all of those cultures being open to the paranormal, I was always interested. And so I kept an eye on it. When I got into high school, I got into math and science was what interested me the most. Martin's leaving. I really bored him with this story, I guess.
No.
But
I'm off camera, so yeah.
So
adjusting the light.
Okay, now it looks great. But so I got into math and science, and I guess that's when I was kind of more of, that's when I really adopted the philosophies behind science and I guess the pragmatism in a way. And I thought, I need to, in a way, honor my ancestry in giving the benefit of the doubt, but then also needed to put it under its paces, put it in trying to, be pragmatic about whether or not these phenomena exist. And I've kind of gone back and forth, but what I've always felt is that even if you do take a scientific look at all of this stuff, what you cannot do is disprove a lot of this anecdotal information. And in science, anecdotal information is what kind of is the impetus to science. We observe a phenomena. We theorize what the phenomena might be. We test those theories, and we come to conclusions or understandings about, the natural world. And there are a lot of issues that I believe are still outstanding. And I think that's what's fascinating. And especially when I was, in journalism, because I did change from wanting to be a rocket scientist to wanting to be a journalist. And so I was doing all kinds of journalist stuff in school. And this is now college. And I saw there was a lot of stories out there that weren't being shared. And this was the 90s. And the 90s was kind of a bad time for UFOs. It was all the television shows ended with a debunking, where they totally debunked, everything they had just told you. And then it was shows, I think, really UFO Files, which John Greenwald helped produce some of the seasons there, that stopped doing that and just showing the information and letting people decide on their own. But those, I thought, all of the television shows, a lot that's out there, didn't include some of the more interesting stories that there are, and there's so many. So I just kind of had this compulsion to share these stories and to learn more. In fact, when the bug really bit me, which was probably just after college when I was a corporate trainer by that time, I just for a period of time was like a hermit. I'd go home and read books about this topic, and then eventually joined MUFON as an investigator, and then kind of came back to what is natural to me, which is sharing stories and writing about this stuff. So in fact, even with MUFON at that point, I became part.
Whoop. I don't know what happened. Let's see. So, everyone, Alejandro has frozen. And I'm not sure. It looks like a Skype thing. I've never had this happen before. Let me go into another screen right here. And I will, I guess the screen is just plain frozen. So I'm going to hang up. And, oops, hope I didn't hang up on everyone. Bill, are you still there?
Call again with Alejandro Rojas.
All right. Bill.
Yes, I'm just letting all listeners know that you're having technical issues.
Yes, thank you. And I don't know what's going on here. It's a little early to go to break, so I'm just waiting, trying to get him back on. So, yeah, it's the strangest thing. I've never seen anything like it. It's all of a sudden it just froze. Okay, so I guess what I'll do is I'll continue. It's trying to call him, but nothing's happening. So I will, let's see, I will take some questions in the chat room until we get Alejandro back on. If anyone has a question, please post it in the chat room or give a call. The phone line is open, and people can call. The number is 603-967-4030. We're taking calls if someone would like to call in. I'm going to text, meanwhile, Alejandro and see if I can raise him that way. And I'm going to ask him to Skype me. And I apologize to the live listener. I don't dare to I guess I will try to hang up on him. Bill, are you there, Bill?
Yeah, I am here.
All right, Bill. Maybe it's going to be a show with you and I.
Hey, well, not for nothing. Alejandro does a lot of great work with UFO Congress and
There he is.
He's back?
I think he's back. Alejandro.
Hello?
Do you have any idea what happened, Alejandro?
No, you froze. I heard you. You're like, uh-oh, Alejandro froze, and I could hear you, and so and then you froze soon after that, and then it said there was a network problem. So,
Well, you're back, and
I don't know.
Because I'm so frazzled, I don't even remember what we were talking about.
So we were talking about kind of my background and interests in this stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if I got through that all before the freezing.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. I think you were talking about, journalism and then, things unanswered and bits and pieces.
Yeah. So I guess I just, came back to wanting to share that credible information. And with MUFON, I eventually became their spokesperson and PR and director of education. This was, by the time, actually about the time that I was a director when Bigelow approached MUFON to come up with that partnership, and which was an extraordinary opportunity for MUFON and for this field. But unfortunately, it didn't end up working out. But little did I know where the money was coming from.
Right. Actually coming from the government?
Coming from, the government. As that was part of, and we know this is confirmed. Well, I've discussed it one-on-one with George Knapp, who's confirmed it, but I believe one of his articles has also confirmed that, which makes sense. I mean, it was a safe assumption to make because that was the same time they were receiving funding, but we did, at least George or somebody had confirmed that, that was, that program was part of the ATIP funding or OSAP or, Pentagon funding.
Now, I had heard, sort of controversial things about that particular situation as far as Bigelow being able to basically review the files. So basically, what was the details of that?
So the details, and I love to straighten this out,
Sure.
and because it's unfortunate. I used a term recently. Oh yeah, I was bragging about using this term on my show with you, I think. And that was that in the UFO field, we tend to be really bad at eating our own, and the bigger the fish, the more we feast.
Yeah.
And certainly Bigelow is a big fish, and people just attack Bigelow, which is unfortunate because my experience has been that him and his organization, and it's been George Knapp's experience, investigative journalist there in Las Vegas who's been close to Bigelow, wrote the book Hunt for the Skinwalker about their probably their most famous, investigation that we also found out was funded by the government for the most part. That really this is a genuine effort to investigate the phenomena. The terms of the agreement were essentially. Can you still hear me?
Oh yeah. Yep.
Okay, because I got a text from you, but I figured that was probably
that was a while ago.
Yeah. A while ago.
Yeah.
But the terms were essentially that Bigelow, that a star team would be made that Bigelow would fund, and this was a rapid response team. So, but it was with MUFON. So Bigelow would fund MUFON to create this, so that there would be transparency, and MUFON would have control over everything, which they did. This team then was to very quickly respond when something would occur, which is exactly the sort of thing MUFON would like to do, but didn't have the funds or the resources to do. So Bigelow would then get information from these cases and all the others, but no sooner than anyone else. For instance, all of that information was posted online. I received that information myself. So that's how this worked. And then Bigelow funded investigation and funded being able to analyze the materials and information that was retrieved. So during this time, there were times where MUFON personnel just could not respond quickly enough. And protocol was that MUFON was to get there first. They were the lead investigators. But MUFON is full of volunteers. Most everybody has jobs, and they can't just drop everything. Kids, responsibilities, they can't drop everything. And I think, if I remember correctly, there was a case where MUFON just couldn't get there for like 2 weeks. And Bigelow's people are like, we can't wait that long, we need to get out there now. And somewhere along the line, it was approved where Bigelow could go send their organization could send people out there and to begin the investigation, and that has caused some of the confusion. However, I was in touch with the guy who ran that program, Richard Lang, and in fact, I have interviews on my podcast with him about all of this. And my, goal was transparency. Nobody was going to the source to let Richard share, his experience with it. And people said, oh, Bigelow bought all this material and hid it. No. Everyone had access to that. In fact, you can find all of those Bigelow cases, the best of the best, and what they discovered in Open Minds magazine. And even on our website, we wrote about all of these cases in detail. And there were some really good cases. There was, I know, a case in the Navajo Nation where this, young woman was followed by this orb. And there was some sort of effects. I can't remember the detail to that vehicle, but there was another case, and I believe this was in the East Coast, similar sort of thing, a person seeing a UFO and their car stopping, and they got there and they were able to measure an electromagnetic effect on the vehicle. The owner of the vehicle was so freaked out about this, he sold the car. So there were a lot of great cases that were a result of these investigations. And all of that material was shared with everyone. So, people claiming that, Bigelow hoarded and hid information, that was not the case at all. And I was able to confirm with everyone that I had the material. In fact, when we printed that at Open Minds, those stories, people complained, well, why does Alejandro get that? Why did they get a printing? And by then, I wasn't officially part of the leadership of MUFON. But like they said, well, anybody could have gotten this information. And in fact, they shared that with other people as well. So when they complained, they were like, well, do you want it? And they're like, yeah. And so they, gave them the stories too. So all of these reports, I think, were even all online, but all, accessible for anyone. And so, I know people dispute that, and there's all these legends and mythologies, but that's my firsthand experience having witnessed the whole thing. There also were conflicts within MUFON management regarding, the program, and unfortunately, that really kind of led to the fall of where the program just didn't work out, and it's partially. I think that Bigelow was trying to take advantage of and bolster an already existing network. And what they could have done is not done that, just gone with their own people. But MUFON already has boots on the ground all over the country. So ideally, it would make sense that would work. But MUFON is just a volunteer organization. And I think that's kind of what made it most difficult, is that, it wasn't people who could drop everything and go run and do these things. And there were territorial disputes. People can get pretty territorial over what happens in their states. And so there were people who just were hesitant. And so it did all break down eventually. And then rumors got started. And people were sharing inaccurate information that, knew better. I'll put it that way. But it was unfortunate that it fell apart.
We've got about 4 minutes to break. How did it actually, and I have another question about that, but how did it actually fall apart and crash and end, actually?
Well, it was these internal disputes with MUFON, and it was often over records because, Bigelow had an expectation over how the financial records were kept, and there were kind of just difficulties in that way because, again, really, I think in that aspect, organization like MUFON probably, and this is probably what should have happened, is they should have hired maybe an accountant to oversee all of that. That probably would have been wise to make sure that it was all transparent and on the up and up. But it was all resource issues. MUFON just didn't have the resources, just like always. And people always, that was a big thing that I used to have to talk about when I was doing PR for MUFON. Why doesn't MUFON do this and why doesn't MUFON do that? I would try to say, first of all, we don't have the resources. We're stretched in already for what we do. And mostly, people are volunteering their time. The board, for instance, all of those individuals have kicked in their own funds periodically to keep MUFON going. I can only imagine how some of those long timers like Bob Woods, how much money they put into it. So it's a volunteer thing. And so when you've got this conflict between, more corporate type of structure and then this volunteer organization, I think there's probably some sort of structure that needed to be put in place that was more formal and probably more robust, that kind of oversaw things.
Well, we got about just a couple minutes to break. But so if Bob Bigelow was actually at that time funded or back-funded from the Pentagon or whatever program it was, how far back were they standing? In other words, were they getting all the information, or did they require to get the information or of any important cases, or did they actually?
Essentially.
One other question: does anyone from the government actually get involved directly, boots on the ground, with any of the cases that you're aware of?
Oh, no, nobody, I don't think, because that was a well-hidden secret that there was any government involvement at all. So there was definitely no boots on the ground. In fact, a lot of people who were involved with Bigelow at the time overseeing this on the Bigelow side were not even aware of government involvement until this last December.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. And do you know, we have just 1 minute here to go, but do you know if the government actually took any interest in certain cases and, almost like Blue Book in a way, it seems like they still had like a just, deniability set up, but still they had a curiosity, it sounds like.
Yeah, and we don't know any of that. So unfortunately, even Elizondo can't share that information. The only case that they've shared that they had an interest in is the Nimitz one. They've released, of course, a couple other videos, and at least one of those we know a little bit, or at least think we know a little bit about its origins. And I can't remember the details right now, but very little information about what the government took an interest in has been released.
Wow, interesting. All right, so we are ready to go to break. This is Martin Willis. My guest is Alejandro Rojas. We are on KGRA Radio and YouTube, and we'll be right back right after these messages.
Clear.
All right, how much time we have this time?
3 minutes.
All right, 3 minutes. Alejandro, so I have some questions, or I have a question. Actually, Kerry wrote this question here. As a journalist, do you think that mainstream media and corporations like NASA are controlled by a higher authority on what output gets out to the public?
Not at all. I used to think that perhaps there was some at some level, but this has been a real interest of mine. So when I interview journalists and people in the media or have been involved, and I have been, especially lately, involved with a lot of NASA stories. I've been to a lot of facilities. I've interviewed several astronauts. In fact, I just released an article with an interview with an astronaut just this last week. And I haven't found any of that. What I found is actually makes me more frustrated about the conspiracies, because what I find when it comes to journalists, and especially with NASA, is that you have people who, for the most part, have very altruistic intentions about what they do. Most journalists, because it's not easy and it doesn't always pay a lot of money, most journalists are passionate about getting information out, and most do their best to get that information out in an unbiased manner. And they certainly, because your job and your access to information is dependent upon it, getting it out accurately, because it's hard for someone to get punished for putting out accurate information. It's the opposite that can really get you in trouble, because all of your competitors are keeping an eye on you. With NASA, these people have their major concern is the public dollar and safety and taking care of those astronauts and getting them there and back again in a safe manner. And when it comes to unmanned missions, to make sure that that public dollar is not misspent, that $10 million instrument they're sending into space is people get their money's worth. And I think anybody who would visit a facility and talk with these individuals would feel that way. And you can't really get as much a sense of that unless you go visit these places and talk with these people. And a lot of NASA facilities, you can go and visit these people and talk with them. I am a huge fan of NASA personnel and of journalists. And every journalist I've talked to, for instance, Lee Spiegel. Lee Spiegel worked for the Huffington Post. He wrote whatever UFO story he wanted. Sometimes they would argue over headlines, and I got to write any UFO story I wanted.
Sorry, we got to go back. Sorry.
Yeah, we got to go back. In 3, 2, 1, go.
All right, welcome back, everyone. This is Martin Willis with Podcast UFO. My guest is Alejandro Rojas, and he was just in the middle of something during break. And I don't know if you want to continue that or kind of ease the listening audience into that, or if you want to move on to something else. What's best for you, Alejandro?
I don't know. It's up to you, I guess. It's your show. What do you think is interesting?
Well, it's all interesting. I think you were kind of capping kind of capping that.
Yeah, I guess I was just talking about, in this case, especially what I was finishing off was journalism. Do I feel that journalism is manipulated by the powers that be? And from my experience, interviewing other people in journalism and the media, that has not been the case. I've interviewed movie makers. I've interviewed investigative journalists, not only George Knapp, but there's like Lee Spiegel, Leslie Kean, but there's others in the mainstream. And for the most part, there is a lot of freedom that, especially in today's world where a lot of journalism is freelance, you go find your story and you write your story. And my experience with Huffington Post, for example, even with Lee, we were never denied to writing a story about UFOs or aliens, especially as long as we we're credible, and we had a reputation to uphold and a reputation that the information was solid because it would be checked. I even wrote about Colonel Halt, who was the highest ranking officer at Rendlesham Forest in 1980 when they all saw a UFO. And Colonel Halt had told me he believed that his men might have been drugged by, other agents in the Air Force that he was not aware of, that they could have come on base, debriefed some of his guys, even used like sodium pentothal, and then left, and he would not have been made aware. And he believed that did occur. So that's some pretty hot stuff. In fact, what's funny about that is we tried to write a press release on this about Colonel Halt coming to a UFO Congress to talk about this. And the press release company wouldn't release the press release because they thought, whoa, this is too much. They didn't listen to my sources because I had him on record, on tape saying this. But no media outlet had denied that information. So surprisingly, it has not been my experience. And I would ask anybody to go talk to a journalist, especially at these conferences where you have like Bryce Zabel, who worked on the TV show Dark Skies. He created it. And some of these others. Those are the type of shows that we would assume would have some sort of manipulation. Now, he does have a couple interesting stories where, maybe somebody tried to kind of frighten him and he doesn't know where these people came from. So there are some interesting stories out there like that, but nothing from like an editor or a manager or a producer saying, hey, you can't do that. Don't talk about that. Nothing like that.
Interesting. We have someone in the chat room just asked a question wondering, have you yourself, the guy's name's Plower, I think it is, have you yourself had any type of paranormal experience?
I've had a couple of UFO sightings, and but that's about all. I feel like I'm forgetting something.
I thought you told me about, I may be confusing you with someone else, but a shadow person or something? Something strange in a hotel? I am confused.
No, that wasn't me.
Yeah.
But because I've done a lot of ghost hunting, and at first you go and you're kind of freaked out and you're like, oh my gosh, this is going to be so fun. We're going to get something cool. But the more and more I did it, it was like I wanted an experience and I was no longer frightened. And my cousin used to tease me because we would go to a haunted place and I would want to know where's the most activity. And I would go shooting off towards there where everybody's like, I'm not going there. But that's exactly where I wanted to be because I wanted to have an experience. But I didn't. That doesn't, to me, mean that it doesn't exist. It just means for whatever reason I didn't. For instance, people talk about Skinwalker Ranch, and George Knapp had talked about how they put him in the scariest location and did all this stuff that usually brings in phenomena because they were hoping to capture something, and nothing happened. And the way John Alexander, retired Army colonel who was involved in that investigation, puts it is that, over a period of time, let's say 3 years, even if you have, dozens of experiences, 24 different experiences that have happened, that's only 24 days over a span of maybe 600 days. So the odds of you any day coming and having an experience is pretty small.
It's just basically the same thing as UFO sightings. I mean, they're so elusive.
Yeah. And how do you have sightings? People ask, how do I have sightings? My answer is always go outside and spend time sky watching. And that's why I think eventually I was a UFO investigator with MUFON for 5 or 6 years before I had my first, what I felt was a UFO sighting. And I have spent a lot of time watching the night sky. In fact, Bill was just talking about how Mark D'Antonio was in town, the MUFON photo and video expert, and we were doing a lot of astrophotography out there, taking pictures of the skies while we're out there doing sky watches. So it's a lot of time out there watching the sky. You see satellites, you see rockets, you learn so much, and once in a great while, maybe you'll see something really odd that just defies explanation.
Now, didn't you write an article about astronomers and UFOs?
I do have an article about that, and that's going to be one of my talks at the Alien Con, which is just this weekend. I'll be headed out there in a couple days.
Right.
And I love this article because, or this lecture, it really justifies, it shows. I use a lot of Seth Shostak in this, and I even kind of use his own words against him, which is I love. And I love Seth, and that's why I like using him in it. He has a lot of great things to say. But he's terrible when it comes to UFOs. You've talked to him before. Yeah. You've had him on the show. And he doesn't really do his due diligence into looking into it. And he just doesn't put any credence in UFO sightings. And when I met him, I told him, I asked him about credible sightings and stuff. And he wouldn't really talk about individual cases. He just said, if there's something out there, astronomers would be into it. And I was like, there are astronomers out there. And that was about the end of our conversation. But I was like, I'm going to make sure I'm prepared to answer that question if that comes up again and if I get to talk to him. So I did a lecture. Not only have they has it been shown, and there's been studies that astronomers are just as fascinated. They have just as many sightings as anyone else. But also, they're the ones who started all of this. The grandfather of modern ufology is Dr. J. Allen Hynek, an astronomer who worked for the Air Force investigating. He thought they were ridiculous, but then he became to see, wow, there's a lot of credible sightings. In 1952, Ruppelt, he wrote a book about this, Colonel Ruppelt, who was in charge of Project Blue Book. He was tasked at the end of Project Grudge, prior to Project Blue Book, the UFO study, to go see what's going on with this UFO stuff. And they were kind of trying to get out of the UFO business, but a bunch of things happened, including Washington 1952 sighting, but also this Life magazine article. And in this article, a couple of the most famous astronomers at the time talked about their UFO sightings and how they believe that we are being visited. And that essentially was responsible for Project Blue Book starting up, and that it created so much public interest. We have Peter Sturrock, who's written a book, and he interviewed a bunch of astronomers. So we have a whole history here. And more recently, we have stories like Jordan talked about, this Oumuamua object, that it's the first interstellar object to come into our solar system and then leave. And there's a lot of mysterious things about it. It moves very strangely. They think this is probably because of radiation from the sun, but in this recent Harvard study that people are writing a lot about in the last couple days, and that is actually getting published in a science journal on the 16th, they say that if that's true, the material that this thing is made of is something that we do not understand because it doesn't move the way it should. So this, whatever it's made out of, is really weird. And then he goes on to speculate that perhaps it was sent here by aliens. Perhaps it's a solar sail being pushed by, the heat of the sun to come in and kind of check out all these different solar systems. And so what's interesting about that, and we have other instances of this more recently, is the astronomers themselves are going to the alien answer. they're pulling the Giorgio Tsoukalos, and they're saying this might be aliens. Yeah. And you know what? It might be. One sad part with Oumuamua is it's now gone too far away. There's no way, even if we wanted to go out there and check it out to see what it's made of, there's no way we'll be able to catch it. We just don't have a craft that can get to it and get back. So we may never find out what's up with that. But
did they have any? You know how a lot of times they can project when something is going to cycle through. If this is actually going, out of the solar system, there's probably no way at all they can understand any type of cycle with that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It came in. They were able through scientific or mathematical equations kind of figure out the general area and 3 solar systems it might have come from, which are very, very far away. And then the sun did pull it around, and then it flew back out in another direction. But now it's headed straight away from us. There's no indication that it'll ever be back. And even if it was, we're going to be long gone, at least you and I, maybe.
That's true.
So maybe the whole planet. So, so it's just come and gone.
That is really fascinating. We have the lines open if anyone wants to call in. A lot of times people have told me they would love to ask Alejandro a question. Now's your chance. That number's up on the screen on YouTube. It's 603-967-4030. That phone number is only live during the shows only. So people call all
Have you ever had anybody do this on the show?
Not yet. He's sipping his Pepsi Cola, whatever it is. And doing the thing. So another question that came in a hypothetical scenario where a respected scientist had an abduction experience that Travis had the abduction experience of Travis Walton endured. How much of an influence would you think this would have within the scientific community on a serious study of the subject? In other words, if a scientist himself had a Travis Walton type of an experience, that really has to do with the personality of the person, basically.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great question. And it could even speak to who is having experiences. And Travis Walton, for instance, is someone, he lives out in Arizona. He's become friends. But I always take a skeptical look at everything. But I've talked with and interviewed, I think, pretty much more of the witnesses than any journalist has, because we've talked to the first police officer. I've talked to, and it's also partially, Karen. She worked on Travis's last conference, and she found witnesses that hadn't spoken before, and they came out to the conference. They then came to the conference, the UFO Congress. Every one of
it froze.
A joke.
It's freezing up again. Yeah, it froze again. We have a caller on the line. Can you hear me, caller?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Sorry, Alejandro froze up. I don't know what is going on. This is the second time this has happened. So we can talk for a minute until he comes back. Did you have a question specifically for him or in general?
It's a question just all around for both of you.
All right. Well, I'll take it until we get him back on.
All right. I'm Matt from South Carolina, by the way.
I meant to ask you. I'm sorry, Matt. Welcome to the show, and
thank you.
Thanks for the call. So go ahead.
What is your and Alejandro's take on Corey Goode and David Wilcock and some of their accusations? And Corey Goode, I think he copyrighted the term secret space program or something like that, right?
I hear a lot of controversy. I just don't know enough about it. I'm not following, basically his circle in particular. So I don't really, Alejandro would probably have some more feedback on that. The secret space program, I'm not really sure. I'm kind of on the fence about that one in particular myself. But But what are your thoughts on? It seems like it's something you're looking into.
I just think it's all a little fugazi. Like Corey Goodness, I think he calls them the blue avians or something, avian people or blue avian people, something like that. It's just all a little too fugazi for me. I think it's, more, instead of being down for the truth and, trying to expose the truth, they're, down for more of a cult following,
It does work. It definitely does work for some people. And they do have an amazing following, and somehow there may be some financial benefits to it. I don't know how that works, but
yeah, I know they're. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
I know they're in pretty tight with the Fade to Black Jimmy Church crowd and all that type of stuff.
It's funny. I saw a posting about that. I guess he's been on there 7 times or something like that. So
yes, sir.
Yeah, so that there is something to that. It's maybe for that particular reason. There's a lot of listeners. For instance, I know if Stephen Greer or certain people like that are on some type of show on YouTube, it gets a lot of views. There's a lot of action.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure.
Yeah, in my opinion. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
In my opinion, the best researcher out there right now is Richard Dolan. He's top notch.
Yeah, I've had Richard on a while ago. It seems to someone just wrote me and said, I haven't actually been following him, but that he has branched out into other things. Are you aware of that?
I watch his live stream. Whenever I get the message for it. I'm not too familiar what else he's branched out into. Everything I've watched is still UFO related.
I see. Now I know I consider him he's very intelligent. He's really a good speaker. I've met him a few times, and he was on my show one time, and it does there are he does have a very strong following. He also is interested in producing books too, right? He has a publishing company of some kind.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Richard Dolan. Peter Iavenda, he's pretty good. The Greers, I'm not too big of a fan of Greer. The John Lears, you have to take what he says with a grain of salt. I think half of what he says is truthful, and the other half is just filler. But yeah, there's definitely some characters in the ufology department.
It is. There's just realistically, there's just a very small portion of the public that has an interest in this. This is just a little tiny fragment of the public that has an interest in this, which I think. I do get that, but if the discovery is that there is other intelligent life out there, I think there would be. Well, I personally think it would be the most amazing thing of our lifetime. But I just think a lot more people would get involved in it if they actually thought there was something to it.
Yeah, I would just love before his time ends. I would love for Buzz Aldrin to come clean and let us know what the hell really went on the moon. I would love that. That would be. I mean, hell, he wouldn't have anything to lose.
I think Buzz is. Buzz is. I don't know for sure, and I don't want to start any rumors, but I understand his health is not so good, and I don't know really much more about it. But I just had heard a few people have told me that, but I don't have any firsthand comments of that. Hopefully he's doing okay.
Yeah, I would love for him to come clean, or George Bush Sr. I would like. I mean, his days, aren't too. He doesn't have too much time left, probably, and him being head of the CIA and a former president, he's got to know what's going on. I would love for one of those two to come clean and let us know what's really happening.
Hang on just a minute. Hang on, Matt, just 1 second here. Caller, would that happen to be Alejandro? Caller? We haven't.
No.
It's not Alejandro. Okay.
No.
Well,
did he drop again?
Yeah, I've been trying to get him back on. Matt, I'll say goodbye to you, and I'll take this call. And hopefully I'm going to try to get to Alejandro to actually call the number here and get him on the phone at least. But, Matt, thanks so much for the call.
Good. Sounds good. Love the show. Bye-bye.
All right, take care. So, new caller, what's your name and where are you calling from?
My name is Jay, and I'm calling from Oklahoma.
Hi, Jay. Welcome to the show.
And I'd like to tell everyone I am no longer a believer in UFOs.
All right.
I am now I've been transformed into a knower.
Oh, wow.
So I had an experience actually last year. I was hoping Alejandro would be on the line because I was in his neck of the woods. I was living out in Scottsdale, in North Scottsdale, Arizona, which is we have some pretty good night skies. And I kind of wanted to get a little bit different angle before I tell you my entire story. It was kind of interesting. We were eating dinner outside because, Arizona's nice. And it was in August of 2017. And I was sitting there with my girlfriend, and I said, I really want to see something definitive. Because, we'd see satellites, and we'd see lights open up and little dots go through them. And I said, I wanted to see something definitive. So I put that energy out there. I wanted to see something definitive for a change. And I'm a former military aviator, and so was my girlfriend. And so we have, 20 years of observation in the sky. Okay, so we're not just somebody that walked outside and looked up. We know what flies around, at least from the Earth. So about 2 hours later, it's dark, and we're kind of being lazy and didn't want to lose our night vision, and we're pointing around the night sky. And I said, okay, well, we'll call this area 2 stars so we could call out satellites to each other and events. And we looked right over at Antares, and I said, and we were both looking at the same spot. And I said, we'll call that. And then we see this humongous disc, and it was kind of teardropped at the end, at the backside of it. And it basically, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm listening. Great story.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yes. And we see this enormous light, and we could actually see detail on it. And then it basically, it went about the length of my finger holding it up into the sky. So it must have been really high in orbit. And it basically either went to warp, or it looked more like it went to warp from, I hate to use the analogy to Star Trek, but basically we saw this shimmering and then it disappeared in a solid line. So in other words, it's almost like a line opened up and the whole craft went through that line. It was absolutely amazing. And I said, did you see that? And she said, I saw it. So I had, when we're both educated, not that really matters, but we're both sane adults. And it was absolutely amazing.
How far would you think it was from you?
I would say it was in orbit. It had to have been absolutely enormous.
So this was
that's the impression I got.
And any other witnesses?
Yes, one other.
And did you actually file a report?
I actually filed it with Alejandro.
Oh, okay. All right.
I didn't receive a follow-up or anything. And I don't remember when I actually went right inside and wrote up the whole thing so I would have it. And that was, it actually happened on August 16th of 2017.
Wow, that's really interesting. And so do you think it actually changed shape, or do you think it just actually took off?
I think it took off, or went through it. I got the impression that it went through a portal. It sped up, and it was enormous. And I'd have to get one of my math guys to do it, because it was about the size. I would say it was 75% of a full moon, the size of it, and it looked way up in the sky. But it was huge from our vantage point.
And
it was big.
Was this at nighttime? What time of the day was it?
It was about 9 p.m.
9 p.m. Okay. Wow, that's really fascinating. And
it was a great experience.
Yeah. How about noise? Was there any noise factor that you're aware of?
None.
And it could have been too far away. Also, that's another, alternative. But
well, I got the impression that it was very far away. I mean, I got the impression that it was in orbit. That's kind of my impression that I got right there. So I kind of got this impression, and it was enormous. We kind of discussed it afterward. And we're like, it almost felt like we were being teased. You know, like, oh, hey, here, look at us. Now you're a believer. So I got my definitive answer.
Wow.
And it was absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
And this is actually the first time I've shared it outside of that experience. So, and writing it to Alejandro. So,
wow.
Hopefully he's listening on the other end.
Well, I don't know. I'm not
hello,
sure.
Hello.
Oh, there he is. Are
wonderful.
you back? Wow.
Yeah, sorry about that. I've never, my internet just had gone down, and I had to restart the router, and I actually haven't experienced that here before, but it happens.
We actually have a caller on the line. He was telling me a story he actually sent you. Do you want to, and don't, not repeat the story completely, but do you want to say hi to Alejandro now that he's back?
Hello, Alejandro. My name's Jay. I'm actually from Oklahoma, but I was living out in Arizona, in Scottsdale last year. And I sent my report in to you. I don't think I received anything from you. That doesn't mean you didn't get it, because I'm sure you get quite a few all the time. However, it was right up North Scottsdale, right there at Cave Creek by the boulders, which I'm sure you could look around and find that location. But I saw something. That's the night I became I became a knower instead of a believer in UFOs. I saw something absolutely amazing up there, and it was very high in the sky, and really changed my whole outlook on it. Because it was so high up in the sky, it went about the length of my finger. So if you do the math, and say it was 75% the size of a full moon, it would have to be absolutely enormous. And the detail on the craft, we could see it was basically rounded in the front, and the back end, it was basically it was round and looked round and flat, but the back side of it was almost like Batman wings. It kind of came down to a point, then went up into the craft, and then came down into a point in the middle, and then came down into what's the best? It's hard to really describe that shape. I could send you a photo or something, or send you a drawing of it. However, once it disappeared in a solid line, I mean, it's almost like it flew behind a door. And so you would see the whole craft disappear in that line, and it was shimmering on the sides and shimmering in front of it. And we saw it. I would say it lasted about a second and a half. But both of us were looking in that same spot, because we were actually mapping the night sky to watch satellites, and we were just putting random names to the different constellations at the time.
Wow.
So.
Yeah, I apologize if I didn't respond or anything. I only am able to respond to a fraction of my emails.
Sure.
Unfortunately, I would need, I think, to hire someone full time to go through all of them. But what's interesting about your story, and I've got Skinwalker on the mind so much, especially with Jeremy Corbell's movie, and the way you describe it, like going behind the door, behind the line, is sort of similar to something they described there, where they felt they were seeing like a hole in the sky to another dimension. And what's interesting, I'm finding these days, is that scientists, surprisingly, because they can be kind of odd, but because there's all this talk in science around multiple dimensions and other dimensions, scientists seemed more readily able to accept the idea that we're seeing somehow holes between our dimensions and others, and they feel, it seems like many of them like that idea better than the extraterrestrial answer. And sightings like yours, are kind of the reason that they believe that.
Interesting.
Well, I think you missed a part that I told that I'd already spoken, that I set out because we'd seen some things in the night sky and some orbs in the house, that kind of thing. And
oh wow!
And this was probably about our fourth occurrence, but I kind of missed some of the other ones. I would see just a look over a little bit too late. But I actually set out while it was still bright. We were eating dinner outside, out in the backyard, like people do in Arizona. And I said to my girlfriend, I said, I want to see something definitive. I put it out there. I put my intention. I want to see something definitive. And then a couple hours later, my wish was granted. And so I don't know, might be more of a Linda Moulton Howe thing, but it's putting that intention out there and it's not like this overwhelming desire to have that experience. But I've been into ufology throughout the years, off and on, and I would say I'm fairly well versed in it. And I'm former military aviator, so is my girlfriend, and so we know what aircraft look like that are at least known to the public. So we're not just somebody going, oh my God, I saw some, it's from Mars or something. So
that's interesting. Now, I have one of my sightings. We did do a CSETI type of protocol where we're sending intentions out. However, the majority of skywatches I've gone to with other UFO people have sent intentions out, and the majority there isn't something. However, one interesting sighting I did have was with a friend. She came into MUFON, and she became a really good friend of mine. But she said, I see these white orbs all the time. And I was like, we were all like, yeah, sure. But I took her seriously because she seemed really intelligent, and we kind of hit it off. She was really funny. And so she's like, well, come on over, and we'll hang out, and we'll see. I'll show you if, we could skywatch. But she didn't skywatch like the rest of us. You skywatch, you go outside and you watch the sky. No, she wanted to talk, and we hung out, and we just talked about UFOs and stuff, and she's like, we should go outside. And I'm like, really? And she's like, yeah, I kind of get a feeling. And I'm like, all right. So we go outside, and we sit down on these loungers that she has. It's probably 10 minutes before she's like, look, there's one over there. And there was, one of these, it was like a little white light during the day. And it faded out. It reappeared somewhere else. It kind of moved and then faded out again, which was similar to what she had videotaped. And she just seemed to be one of those people and she felt she had other experiences. And at the time, I was really skeptical of people who felt they had alien experiences. But especially being part of MUFON, I have more and more people come up and say, and they're very timid. And luckily, they felt comfortable enough to share that with me, their experience. And then I became friends with Dr. Leo Sprinkle, and sometimes I'd take people out there. He was the only one I really trusted because he was an actual, PhD, and he worked at a university as he headed up part of the psychology department. And I don't know, even to this day, I don't know what to make of that stuff, but it really opened my mind to, who knows? There's a lot of people that report, and a lot of people say that's absolutely ridiculous. That a lot of people report seeing something off in the far distance, and as soon as they see it, it moves towards them. And, people, especially scientific-minded, even in this field, are like, that's ridiculous. There's no way they could have had an effect. But why not? I mean, I love the Arthur C. Clarke saying, any sufficiently advanced technology is going to look like magic to those who don't understand it. And so just because we don't understand it doesn't mean it's not possible. That somehow, by sending our intentions or attention in a certain direction doesn't have an effect on something that we're observing. So, yeah, I don't know. It's really interesting. Thanks for calling in. I apologize I wasn't able to get back to you, but it's fascinating, exciting.
Yeah. I love the show, and I love following both of your activities.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks again for the call. All right.
Sure. Bye.
All right. Bye. So we do have the line open. That's up on the screen on YouTube. Anyone can call 603-967-4030. Someone else had called in earlier. We chatted for a bit. Matt from, I think it was North Carolina, I believe. Anyway, he wanted to know what your thoughts were on Corey Goode, but we really don't have to go there unless you wanted to talk about that. Otherwise, I do have another question that came in.
I'll just very quickly say, I still find it dubious. I personally don't see anything really substantial that proves that story to me. And there are at least one red flag in that the marketing aspect of his website and everything. I just personally, it doesn't seem like if we really had a whistleblower, would they have this, polished kind of website up with all this information and have this whole marketing engine rolling. That to me doesn't sound, but I don't know.
Well, that's a really good point. That makes, I never thought of that, but absolutely. That kind of goes totally against the grain of anyone that would be supposedly, secretly coming out, for sure. All right, the question that came in from Carrie again is, do you think the public's reaction would be blasé to a major announcement regarding extraterrestrial life, as we seem to have such a short attention span these days? I love that.
Probably. And I think that, Lou Elizondo feels that he was the harbinger of disclosure. He believes that disclosure happened when that New York Times story came out, and which is largely based on what he said. But like I said, there were other sources, so other people had come out too. He feels that was disclosure of what the government has done and knows about UFOs. And I don't know if that's true. He even admits that it's possible that there were things going on he was not aware of, but he doesn't think so, just because of all the pushback he got, which kind of fits along the lines of John Alexander, the colonel from the Army, who says he really looked for where's the secret project and didn't find any. He looked before Elizondo's program, but at the same time, Alexander interfaced with Bigelow and helped Bigelow establish a lot of his investigations. And Alexander didn't know about this Pentagon program until December of, and he shared that with me on my podcast. So he was an insider and he didn't know. So and that's an example. There could be something they didn't know, but the fact remains that it's a pretty major disclosure that the government had this secret program where they spent tens of millions of dollars investigating UFOs and the paranormal, and that part hasn't even really sunk in with people. And people are like, oh, interesting. I mean, even the people I share all the details with, in the general public are like, that makes sense, And so they do seem to be pretty blasé about that aspect. And a lot of these people are assuming that means the government was investigating aliens. Now, Elizondo says, no, we don't know what they were or where they came from.
Yep.
But even those who assume it means aliens are like, yeah, I figured that was the case. So I think you're right. I think people would be pretty blasé. There's an anime like this, and it's really funny because there's this one kid, and he's the only one that's shocked, that we just found out there's aliens coming to the planet, and everybody else is like, and they just go on with their life. So, yeah, maybe I think that it may be less impactful than we think. We're actually going to have a panel regarding this with myself, Jason McClellan, Richard Dolan, and Stephen Bassett at AlienCon this weekend.
Oh, great! Wow. I don't know. Did you happen to watch it's a recent movie called UFO? That's the only title of it.
No, I didn't see that movie. I think it had Gillian Anderson in it.
That's right. Yeah. Anyway, I watched that, and it's if you follow the UFO field, you'd be thinking all the way through that, like, oh, this is ridiculous, because they're making such a big deal and chasing this guy down just for some information, mathematical information on a UFO and all that. And so I don't want to give the movie away for anyone that hasn't watched it, but basically, the only way the whole thing ties in and makes sense is the very end. But until that time, someone in the field like you or me would be just thinking, oh my God, that's way overboard. And then at the very end, it makes total sense. But
thumbs up.
Yeah, it was pretty good. It was pretty good. Semi thumbs up. But the interesting part about it is, this kid is like totally fascinated and totally into it. Like, this is really, the most amazing thing. But everyone around him is like, okay, enough. But I do think, the Pentagon thing was, you're right, it's not saying aliens per se. But if it actually came out that we had 100% evidence that there's intelligent life out there, I think it's a big deal. But how many other people may not? The average person out there that doesn't really care that much about, space in general or anything else, may just think, so what? Won't change anything. Won't change.
I may be a nerd. I flipped about the New York Times story. I mean, I thought that was a big deal. And even To the Stars, when Tom announced that and everything, all the people he was talking to, I thought that was a big deal to me. That was one of the most exciting things ever to happen.
Yeah.
But even people in this field are like, eh.
I know. Well, it is something. And there is so much news there's so much information coming at us all the time. And there's more and more and more. And then, everyone has a smartphone and there's all types of, info coming at you. And that just makes everyone's attention span in general short. And, the news, if you're watching the news over the last few years, it's like so much coming in all at once. And then a major story is like nothing. It's just
I could see, a story with like a millennial something on their phone. They're waiting for the subway. They get in the subway. They sit down. They look up, and it's an alien sitting next to them, and they're like, figures.
Put it on Instagram, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. Can I do a selfie?
Yeah. Okay, another question came in. Who do you consider an unsung hero in the field of ufology today?
Some of my biggest heroes, I guess I would say, and I would put it that way. Nick Pope, I think, is one. I think that, with these people like Nick Pope, he didn't imagine you're working for the government, the Ministry of Defense, or in our case, the Defense Department, kind of like Lou Elizondo. Lou Elizondo is a new Nick Pope, who is also a hero of mine. And, all of a sudden you get put on this UFO project and you're like, oh, this is stupid. And, you go through your paces, even if you're like, wow, there's some real stuff here. Would you want to share that information and damage your friendships or potentially with your friends and your colleagues? I think that's really brave of these guys to come out and to share this and to really push this topic forward. So I'm really into them. Some of the other people, of course, Hynek and Jacques Vallée is his partner. Jacques Vallée, for instance, is a scientist. He's a venture capitalist. He works in the highest circles, the highest echelons, much like a lot of the people with To the Stars, Chris Mellon, who's part of the Mellon family. Yeah. And also, you had him on the show. You're one of the few people. And he, worked at the for the White House and all of these things.
Department of Defense, too, yeah.
Yeah, Department of Defense. All of these people who put their reputations on the line, and I think it's difficult for some of us to kind of quantify or understand what a big deal that is. Because the higher you get, especially in sciences and things like that, the more, your reputation is really important, that you have to guard it in order to get funding or in order to get, your projects pushed through and these things to happen. And so it's really brave of these people. Bigelow, it's really brave of them. The people who have a lot are putting more on the line. And I really admire them. And then I'm also a humongous fan of George Knapp. Of course, being a journalist, he's won tons of awards. I love the way he tells stories. He tells stories in a unique but concise and entertaining and educational, informative way. And he's a big hero of mine. I think he's great. So, yeah, those are some of my heroes. Leslie Kane is a huge hero of mine. I mean, she's typically her stories get so much attention because she is very, very, very careful.
Yeah.
More so than a lot of these guys who have more on the line about the credibility factor. Because she and it shows, it pays off. Her book is a New York Times bestseller. The stories she writes get tons of attention, including the New York Times story that she was one of the authors of. So she's definitely another big fan of mine. And I do appreciate a lot of the other fringe people who are considered fringe even in the UFO field. Someone mentioned Lynn Moulton Howe, which certainly as I would consider on the fringe end, and I don't mean that in a bad way at all. But for instance, I was just, there's information about this material that To the Stars is analyzing. And the best history on that material, I think, is at Linda Howe's site. So she's done, a tremendous amount of work out there. So even if I don't totally agree with anybody, not George Knapp, not anybody, and they don't agree totally with me. Nobody, two people, totally agree on everything. But we need to respect each other and respect all of our contributions. And I try to, and I really, truly do respect the contributions of a lot of people out there in this field who are genuinely looking for information to share with the public.
So where do you think ufology is heading at this point?
Ufology, I think, is in a really kind of strange crossroads right now, personally, I feel. There's this tug. There's this tug to, we have an unusual and unprecedented opportunity right now to really engage and interact with and effectively kind of infiltrate the mainstream in science and in media, at very many levels in government, and this is all happening. At the same time, there's speculation and strongly held worldviews that are kind of taking people in another direction, and that even includes religion. George Knapp and Luis Elizondo have written about how religious factions inside of the government were really responsible because they thought UFOs and paranormal were demonic for getting a lot of that funding taken away. In fact, Luis Elizondo said his predecessor, his career was ruined by these people, even though some of these people were his really close friends. So I think that's kind of the crossroads we're at. And I'm certainly hitching my wagon on this mainstream side because, mainstream science and journalism is where I'm at, and I love it. And I think it's really fun for me to be able to interview an astronaut like Scott Kelly, probably the most famous astronaut at this moment, and to be able to bring up UFOs with him. And I can say, well, the Pentagon had this UFO program. What do you think of that? It's a unique opportunity where I can, bring these interests and not feel as scared or worried about doing that. And this conversation is reaching other levels. I think some people kind of liked, being a niche and having our own thing, but I'm really loving, and I know George Knapp has really expressed this, that he is basking in this newfound interest among the general public into this topic, and a credible eye being put to all of this. And I agree with that. It's an incredible time, not just for UFOs, but for space in general. We may be going to Mars within the next 10 years. Yeah. We may have space tourism happening as soon as next year. And these are all some of the stuff I write about. And I think this is a really exciting time. And so it's really fun to share all of this.
So now you're a blogger on Den of Geeks, which is one of the top, I forget how many websites.
I'm a writer,
not
a blogger there.
Yeah, writer. I'm sorry. You're a journalist. Yeah. So how are they receiving your articles? I know, some of them are space and stop doing that. Some of them are space related and stuff like that. But how are they handling the UFO articles over there? Do they get some good reads?
They do. My first UFO article got huge reads. I think my Scott Kelly one asking him about UFOs and aliens was a really big one for them, which is great because I know that even though they write about sci-fi entertainment, that's their main deal, that they were a little hesitant to kind of dip their toes in the UFO water. And I think that some of it was influenced, at least by those of the more worried about it, was, well, the To the Stars stuff, and also this new History Channel show coming up, Project Blue Book. So that's helped. In fact, I'm going to be able to watch the first couple episodes of this next week, There's a special History Channel pre-screening. In fact, if you live in Arizona, email Phoenix MUFON or myself, try to get a hold of us, and we can probably get you into a screening. Because they're telling us invite whoever we want.
Wow, I just got an email from Sam Moranto, our friend in Chicago. He was saying, "Are you going to come out?" I go out to Chicago a bit here and there, and he said, "Have you happened to be here on the 14th?" And so they're doing a screening out there as well.
So that's really exciting. That's helped, but there are also some people at Den of Geek that are very, very enthusiastic about this topic. So they're loving it too. So it's been really great. They like it, but of course, what's funny, and I get more scrutiny at Den of Geek than I did at Huffington Post. Not to say that they're saying, "Oh, you can't print this," but they're saying, they want to make sure that it's very credible. Essentially, they don't want their reputation smirched. They don't want to look like a tabloid. So I have to even be more careful. So I don't write as many UFO stories because of that, but that allows me the opportunity to write a lot more space stories, and I love space stories.
Right. I've had a fascination myself. Do you think in recent years, people talk about there hasn't been any really big like UFO story, but when it comes to like the Nimitz UFO, do you think that is, I think it's an incredible story, but what are your thoughts on that as far as more or less a newer UFO story? I know it's 2004, but still.
It's 2004, but we had little bits and pieces of information that were dripped out for many years. And now we've gotten a whole motherload of well, I shouldn't say the motherload. It feels like the motherload because it's a lot more than we've had before, and a lot more than we've had for a lot of UFO cases. Although we know, and Lou has even said this at Lizondo, that there's a lot more information that is still locked up in government files about this case and other similar cases. He alludes to that there are a lot of cases like the Nimitz, but they're just not releasing that information, and he's not at liberty to share. So I love the Nimitz. I think the Nimitz case is extraordinary. We have radar. We have witnesses, observations. We have a tiny bit of video, and tiny bit of video. But the witness testimony, when it comes to like a court of law, there's a big difference between a regular witness and an expert witness. And in this case, we really have expert witnesses. Even in science, that's important. The person who asked earlier, would it be a big deal if a scientist was abducted? It would be a much huger deal. It would be, if Carl Sagan was abducted, he was so extremely well respected that if he shared his experience, it certainly would convince a lot of people. A lot of the really hardened skeptics, no, but that I think would be the minority. So when we have David Fravor, the commander of this wing, coming onto CNN, Fox News, all of them, and talking about his experiences, I think that is a very big deal. Really, Phoenix Lights is very well known out here in Arizona and across the world. And Roswell, of course, is well known. But we have better data and information on the Nimitz case than any of the most famous cases, really, except for maybe Rendlesham, because we have so many military witnesses in that case as well. But and some radar data and everything too. So I think Nimitz is an extraordinary and very important case.
We only have a couple minutes left, just over a minute and a half or so. But I wanted to, what you just said. They probably have cases, more cases like the Nimitz. Wouldn't that be so interesting to have the inside story? Wouldn't that be so interesting to know what these people know?
Yeah, and I think when I get the sense, when especially when you're talking face to face with Louise and he's kind of relaxed, that he wants to share so badly, but he's just got to take a breath once in a while, and he's like, oh man, he says, brother, if you knew, oh brother, because he likes that term. Brother. Military guys use that a lot. So they're a band of brothers. So, I would love to know. Even Nick Pope has some stuff that he can't share due to his oath of secrecy to the UK government. One question I asked is, have you ever briefed the royals on any of this? And he said, I'm not at liberty to talk about that.
Isn't that something? Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's like saying yes.
Exactly. I said, well, you kind of answered my question. And he said, well, take it as you wish.
Yeah, yeah. Alejandro, so we got just like a minute here. Can you quickly talk about what you do on Thursday nights?
Oh, yeah. Thursday I do UFOs Seriously Live. So I talk about essentially the week. I talk about what I've written about, including some of the space stuff and everything. And then I also go over the news, the UFO news of the week. And so we go story by story. And, some people will know at Open Minds I used to do daily UFO headlines. Don't have time for that, so I do the weekly. But what's fascinating, and people don't realize, is there's a lot of UFO news every single week. Always have a lot. In fact, I have a hard time keeping the show down to an hour. It's even gone up to, 2 hours at times. But it's a lot of fun. And then I also answer questions in the chat like you do here.
Yeah, yeah. I've joined in a couple times over there. It's a lot of fun. Alejandro, thanks so much. We're out of time. It's
my pleasure.
Always a lot of fun talking to you.
Thanks, man. You too.
All right, and we'll talk to you next week on the regular news. And have fun this weekend.
Yeah. I'll be back to the news, dude.
All right. Have a great time this weekend.
Thanks, man.
All right. Okay, everyone. So that's it for the show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with Ray Stanford. Should be an interesting show. And again, thanks so much for listening. I really appreciate it. And remember to keep your eyes to the sky.